10. The Bad Vigilante. In 2016, a man named Nick Cross formed a vigilante group in Australia. This was after a gang of teenagers attempted to break into his home, a terrifying event that saw him hiding inside with his 10-year-old daughter, both scared for their lives. He told reporters at the time that there were 12-year-old kids armed and dangerous in his neighborhood, while most of these kids were led by a handful of guys in their 30s. They were carjacking people, breaking into homes, and causing all kinds of trouble. So, Nick came up with his own vigilante gang. Nick and his group of like-minded vigilantes supposedly patrolled the streets at night, trying to keep things a little bit safer. But it didn't last very long. 2 years later, Nick was a changed man, and in December 2018, he was charged with murdering a woman named Madison Parrott, 29. Madison's body was discovered with extreme burns inside the flimsy remains of a tent at the Geelong Showgrounds. 2 days after her corpse was found, Nick Cross was arrested at his home in Sydney by tactical police. He and his 2 accomplices allegedly shot Madison in the head, ditched her body in a tent, and then burned it. As for the motive, it all had to do with drugs. Nick may have started a vigilante group, but by 2018 he was homeless and suffering from a major heroin habit. His 2 accomplices, Todd Sell and Tracy Menzies, were addicted to crystal meth. Madison Parrott just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. 9. Phoenix Jones. Phoenix Jones is the only real masked vigilante who ever tried to operate in the city of Seattle. He described himself as a legit superhero and started patrolling the streets of Seattle dressed up in a costume back around 2010. It all started after Jones witnessed his friend being beaten to a pulp outside a bar. Since Jones was trained in mixed martial arts, he decided to get out there and do something about it. Almost right away, he became an enormous problem for the police. He was supposed to just patrol, call 911 if he saw crimes, and leave the arresting to the cops. But the police were irritated because Jones kept trying to break up fights by himself. He was pepper spraying people and running around with a sidekick named Ghost. Less than a year after he started in 2011, the police arrested Phoenix Jones and unmasked him as Benjamin Fodor. He was arrested for pepper spraying 4 people who'd supposedly been in a street brawl. This brought his time in the spotlight to a close, although he did apparently continue to fight crime for several years afterwards. More recently, Benjamin Fodor was arrested with his girlfriend in January 2020 on drug charges. 8. The Predator Hunter. For over 2 years, Kyle Swanson's been the head of a vigilante group in St. Louis. Kyle and his group of predator hunters specialized in stopping potential abusers of children. They pose as youngsters on social media, convincing men in the St. Louis area to meet them in a parking lot somewhere. But it's Kyle and his team who show up, confront these creeps, and live stream it for tens of thousands of people to watch at home. According to Kyle, he's helped the police jail hundreds of very sick people ever since he launched his organization, KTS Predator Hunters, back in 2019. But in 2021, Kyle ended up on the other side of the law. A grand jury indicted him in January for unlawful restraint and obstructing justice. He was also charged with misdemeanor assault. It all happened after he lured a man in Madison County, Illinois into his car. He then refused to let the man out and threatened him with violence. The state attorney for Madison County said that even if what Kyle was doing was for laudable purposes, he can't just take justice into his own hands. Kyle denied all wrongdoing, and most people on social media are on his side. Kyle even took to TikTok to say the police are actively protecting child predators, while all Kyle was trying to do was protect kids. Following Kyle's issues with law enforcement, KTS Predator Hunters was forced to close down. 7. Riding the world of evil. On January 9, 2013, a gang of vigilantes kidnapped a drug dealer, chopped him into pieces with a machete, and left the chunk sitting in a field, all because they wanted to rid the world of evil. These 3 men came from Kentucky, and 2 of them were former Marines. They were arrested and charged with the kidnapping and killing of a 19-year-old named Daniel Delphin. They were also charged with abuse of a corpse and tampering with evidence. According to the investigators, the vigilantes were Jeffrey Allen, Stephen Harkness, and Anthony Baumgartner. All 3 admitted to the murder, saying it was all part of their grand plan to cleanse the world. The unsuspecting victim had been lured out into the open under the pretense of them buying drugs. When the dealer showed up, the vigilantes choked him until he died, then dumped his body in a field. And for some inexplicable reason, they cut him into pieces before fleeing. The 19-year-old had been a known heroin dealer with prior convictions, which is why the vigilantes targeted him. But in the end, their brilliant plan to cleanse the world didn't get beyond their first victim. The field in which they'd dumped the body was right beside Jeffrey Allen's house. It wasn't that difficult for the police to make the connection. 6. Fatal shooting in Kenosha. A 17-year-old with a gun showed up at a protest in Kenosha, Wisconsin back in August 2020. With his baseball cap flipped around, a bag of supplies hanging from his shoulder, and what appeared to be a semi-automatic rifle in both hands, he arrived to protect the businesses in the area from those who were protesting. The teenager was identified as Kyle Rittenhouse. According to his social media account, he was a big Donald Trump fan and an enthusiastic supporter of the Blue Lives Matter movement. He brought it upon himself to visit Kenosha during a night of demonstrations following the shooting of Jacob Blake. Jacob had been shot 7 times by an officer, while his 3 sons watched in horror from inside his vehicle. He was shot in the back and left partially paralyzed, but he miraculously lived. When Kyle Rittenhouse arrived in the throng of protesters, he wasted no time and started shooting. He shot a man in the head, shot 2 more people, and then marched on down the street with his gun in both hands, totally uncontested by the nearby police. At one point, Kyle even put his hands in the air to surrender, but the police just kept driving past him. Kyle killed 2 people that night and seriously injured a 3rd, and went home to sleep in his own bed. It wasn't until later that a fugitive warrant was activated for his arrest, and he turned himself into the authorities. In 2021, the 17-year-old vigilante was found not guilty on all counts. 5. The train jammer. Dennis Nickel has been described as the silent avenger. Dennis is a financial analyst who works at the University of Illinois Hospital in Chicago. In 2015, Dennis decided he was tired of his commute being filled with noisy people talking on their phones, music blaring out of people's phones, and all the filming and all the chaos. So, he decided he was going to do something about it. Chicago residents started noticing that while they were on the train sometimes, their calls would be dropped and they'd suddenly have no service. It wasn't until about a year had gone by that somebody finally took a picture of Dennis Nickel sitting on the train with a jammer in his hand. He had an actual device that could silence cell phones within a mile radius. The device is illegal and very powerful. This thing can crash cell phone signals and radio signals in a pretty broad area. After Dennis was caught with the jammer, the Chicago Police Department and the Chicago Transit Authority got involved. They conducted an undercover sting operation to catch Dennis in the act. His jammer was taken away and he was charged with a felony. When asked about his motivation, Dennis said he simply wanted to travel in peace. His lawyer, Charles Lauer, told news sources that Dennis may have been a bit selfish, but he didn't have any malicious intent. People on social media praised Dennis as a silent hero, with some saying all buses and trains should have their own jammers for the sanity of the people. 4. Marianne BACHMEIER. Marianne BACHMEIER took justice into her own hands when she opened fire inside a crowded courthouse on March 6, 1981. Back then, this was in West Germany. She was furious because a man of 35 years, a known predator, was on trial for murdering Marianne's daughter. Instead of getting justice from the legal system, Marianne got vengeance from the 6 bullets that struck the man and killed him. All these years later, Marianne is still infamous in Germany. Local news has described what happened that day as the most spectacular case of vigilante justice ever seen in Germany after the war. But the truth of what happened is far from spectacular. In the 1970s, Marianne was a struggling single mother. She ran a small pub in the West German city of Lübeck, where she lived with her daughter Anna. Her 2 previous children had been given up for adoption, but she was determined to keep Anna. Tragedy struck when Anna was discovered dead on May 5, 1980. She'd been killed by her neighbor, a local butcher named Klaus Grabowski, who had a criminal record of preying on kids. The trial was a total nightmare. Klaus's lawyers claimed that he had acted out of the hormonal imbalance caused by being voluntarily castrated years earlier. Marianne couldn't risk him getting away with it because of some technicality, and so on the third day of the trial, she pulled out a .22 caliber Beretta and pulled the trigger 8 times. 6 of the shots hit home, and Klaus died on the floor of the courtroom. In 1983, Marianne was sentenced to 6 years in jail. 3. The Sword Master of Arkansas. In 2021, there was a superhero running around a city in Arkansas covered in body armor, looking a lot like Batman and wielding a pair of swords. And according to his social media, he was on the hunt for a serial killer. The vigilante's name is Shadow Vision, and he was patrolling Little Rock, Arkansas after a woman was stabbed 15 times. 3 people were knifed to death in the city between 2020 and 2021, and Shadow Vision was determined to bring the killer to justice. He even posted on his Facebook page that he knew the killer's name and was actively hunting him. He even proposed a one-on-one fight to settle things for good. However, it's been over a year and we haven't heard another peep out of Little Rock. It looks like the masked vigilante hasn't caught any killers. And unfortunately, the serial stabber appears to be still on the loose. 2. Duckling murder. In the United Kingdom, there are no masked vigilantes. The vigilantes in the quiet English countryside operate in a slightly different capacity than the ones across the water in the US. For example, someone took justice into their own hands in May 2022. It happened near Stoke-on-Trent when an individual ran over 3 ducklings while moving through a roundabout. The driver was behind the wheel of a white transit van and had been driving recklessly. They ignored the other motorist who'd been waiting for the ducks to cross the road and mowed 3 ducklings down in cold blood. One individual who was there and saw what happened gave chase. He got the number on the license plate and had a heated discussion with the duck killer, who made it pretty clear he didn't care about the ducks. The bystander was so angry that he took the plate number and published it online. The license plate number circulated across pretty much all platforms, inciting a mob of angry residents to call for the driver to be hunted down and taught a lesson. This was such a huge problem that the Staffordshire police had to ask the public not to take matters into their own hands. It was spiraling out of control, and this guy could have been dragged out of his house by an angry mob. It never happened, but it definitely came close. 1. Gary Plausche. Gary Plausche killed a man on live television. It happened in 1984 after a violent predator named Jeffrey Doucette kidnapped and assaulted Gary's son, Jody. At the time of the incident, Jody was only 11 years old and was taking karate lessons with Jeffrey. The abuse had been going on for at least a year, and in February 1984, Jeffrey stole the boy and took him from Louisiana to California. The boy was only discovered because he managed to make a collect call to his mum from the motel's phone. California police raided the motel and saved the boy. But the damage was already done, psychologically and physically. Even after Jody returned home to his family in Louisiana, things just weren't the same. About 2 weeks later, on March 16th, Jeffrey was flown back to Louisiana to go on trial. Gary found out exactly what time his child's terrorizer would arrive at the Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport, and he went there to meet him. Gary had actually gotten the information from an employee of a local news station. The news crew set up their cameras in the airport, hoping to get a dramatic confrontation between the 2 men. But what nobody had expected was that Gary would take the law into his own hands. As the 2 men came close to one another in the airport, Gary pulled out a handgun and shot Jeffrey at point-blank range in the side of the skull. In the murder's aftermath, Gary was put on trial. He pleaded no contest to manslaughter and was given 7 years. But the sentence was suspended, and so he only ended up with 5 years of probation and 300 hours of community service. Would you rather a team of vigilantes patrol your neighborhood or the actual police? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching. Remember to hit subscribe, and I'll see you again soon.